Hello again. We are back on the steaming bay about 3 o'clock. Last saw you at about 10 o'clock, 10:30, something like that. We were firing up 617 here. We were going to get ready for the day of pulling freight cars, and we got about halfway around the track. That's about how far we got. We got about halfway around the track, and I wasn't running. I was letting someone else run this engine. We got about halfway around the track, and a steam line from the water glass here, which tells me how much water's in the boiler, burst right up against here. Probably can't see it all that well because it's behind the water glass and it's up against the boiler. But it goes from here into the boiler, or some way, I don't know. My engine. And it burst right on the joint to the boiler and the steam and the water glass. So it just sprayed steam everywhere, making it that basically declared the day was done for this engine. It was about 11 o'clock when that happened. But since we're here on the rack today and we're doing nothing, I'm going to give you a quick little show on how a steam engine really works. Take off the seat, this nice custom-made seat. Now, here in the tender, you have water and coal. And well, I guess I should see what's going on over here, shall we? Something wrong? Mike.
What? What about it?
Take care of it.
Yeah, take care of it, bud.
Alright. We have water into here. And as you can see, it's very dirty water. There's lumps of coal in there. Yeah. Alright, back again. They're going to be firing up the 713 one more time. That's my engine. And they're going to fire it up one more time just before the end of the day. Caboose Mikey wants it fired up, so I'm going to fire it up for him again. But back to this engine. Here's the coal bunker, and we carry our bituminous coal here.
Get on.
And what we do is we start the day with charcoal that's been soaked in diesel fuel. There's a few lumps left in there. And we soak it in the diesel fuel for about 10 minutes or so. And we put a good amount in the firebox. We put enough in there to get to the bottom level of this firebox right here, the firebox door. And then we get the blowtorch and we light the fire. And of course we'll have air hooked up into this little hole here, which is going straight into the boiler. Now, we get a little bit of air going. We get enough to going to get a draft for the fire, but we get enough so we don't so we don't suck the fire right out of the firebox, which we don't want to do. We let the charcoal burn in there for a little bit, and then finally we start adding pieces of coal. Once the coal gets going good, coal has to get bright and fiery, I guess you could say. The pressure gauge here, the needle will come off of the peg at 0 and slowly build up. Now when I reach about 50 or 60 pounds, I'll take it off the air and I'll put the nut back in. That's when it can run on its own pressurized steam from the blower here, which I left open. And that's the blower, which will again keep the fire going. And it took us about an hour to fire this engine up. It's a coal-fired engine. And normally we fire this engine on wood. In the beginning we fired on wood, then we get coal in there. But the charcoal's a little tougher. What we have to do is we have to let it soak for a little bit, and then we have to put it in there, and then we have to give it just a little bit of air. We can't give it too much, and we have to give it a little tiny bit because then it's even worse. The fire is delicate with charcoal, and once the fire gets going good, we can start cranking up the air just a little bit. But I would have to say, in my honest opinion, firing this engine on wood is a lot better. Now once the pressure reaches about 120 pounds, the safety valves here, these are the safety valves, what they do is they release pressure. When the engine reaches a certain pressure, one will raise at about 122 pounds. This one will raise at 122 pounds, which means it's going to blow steam out of the top. And then if this one doesn't succeed in lowering the pressure, which is only when I'm on air, this one will lift, which will lift at, I think that's 137 or 132. I can't really read it. It's gone now. And once I hear them blow, that means I'm at 120. The pressure gauge will drop back to about 100, and if I keep putting coal into the firebox and keep the firebox good, that means I'm going to be able to keep pressure up. Now, before I always set up, every time we do several things before we set out for the day. First, we test the injector. This is an injector right here. Now, what's cool about an injector is there are no moving parts inside of the injector. It works solely on steam. It takes water from the tender, and then it goes up into here, and it uses steam from the engine to push it through the pipe, through the check valve, and into the boiler. There's the check valve right here for it. And then that's basically it. It's a very simple thing. And in here, inside the cab, is my water valve. And when I'm running this engine, you always turn the water on first, and then you turn steam on. Now, you kind of fight with it a little bit, I guess you could say, where you get to the point where there's no water dripping out of the bottom of the injector. There's a pipe down here. And when it gets to the point where there's no water coming out of there, that means your injector is filling up the boiler, and it's working. Now, when water starts dripping out of there again, that means your injector's done its job, or there's, crank back on the water and let the steam go in some more. And so that means I will shut the steam off first, and then I shut the water off. With an injector, if the injector gets too hot because I've left the steam on, the injector will not work again, and I'll have to find a way to cool it off, or I'll have to kill the fire in the engine and wait for the injector to cool off, then I have to fire up again. Then, once we know the injector works, we get our oil can. This isn't my oil can. There's actually none in it. But on each driver and axle of a locomotive, steam locomotive, there's spots to oil. There's right here, right there. There's oil caps on other locomotives, but on this locomotive, we oil right where the driver meets the bushing. And same all along here, and you can see where it's become unbelievably dirty, and I'm going to wash this engine in a little bit. And there's holes all over the place. We put oil in there. There's an eccentric in here. There's an eccentric in there in between these two drivers. Now that's for the axle pump. And the axle pump works similar, put it on there, works similar to an injector. The axle pump works when the engine's rolling. It's hooked up to the eccentric, and the eccentric's on the axle for this driver. As that driver spins, that axle pump's going to go in and out, and it's going to pump water into the boiler. Now, on this engine, I do not have a way to turn off the axle pump. I do have a way to check if it's working, which is a small valve over here. It's just this small valve right here. I simply turn it on, and it will pump water out this little hole here. And then when I found out it works, I close it. And then inside the cab here, there's a valve right here, and that's the bypass right there for the axle pump. When I'm getting too much water in there and I don't want to blow it down. When I blow it down, I'm letting steam out of the boiler and out of the sight glass, but I'm also using up pressure that I need to go around the track. So I simply just crank the bypass open just a little bit and it'll work. Now, when it's time for me to get more water in the sight glass using the axle pump, I just turn off the bypass and it'll go back to working on its own. This little contraption here, this is the steam generator for the bell, and a simple little valve right here, which has not been turned in about 20 years now, is what we use, and we just we turn it on and it turns the bell up at the front. Now, in this particular engine, the throttle lever is in the cab, like every other steam engine in the world. The throttle lever is in the cab. But in the smoke box for this particular engine, in the smoke box is all the throttle special steam line stuff, as I call it. In lots of engines, there's like the 713, there's a throttle in the dome. And then there's steam lines heading from the dome into the smoke box. And once they go through the smoke box, they immediately go into the cylinders, and that's what causes the wheels to turn. In this one, the lever for the valve for the throttle is in the smoke box, just behind this. If I were to take this off, you could see it, bright as day, because it's right up against this. Once, you open the throttle, and the steam goes through, and it goes straight into the pistons, which turns the wheels round and round, which makes us go. That is basically a steam engine. One thing I forgot to add, two things I forgot to add, was this right here is my steam pump. This is my steam pump. It's supposed to do that. This is the steam pump. Now it's another way, like the axle pump or the hand pump. This is the hand pump, by the way. I barely use that. This is how Hercules got strong. He used this back and forth. That's how Hercules got his muscles. But this is another way to get water into the boiler. It pumps, instead of using the injector, the axle pump, hand pump, it uses lubrication in here, and it pumps steam through and up and, well, down and up. And of course, when there's no more lubrication in here, the whole thing seizes up, and then you have to take it apart and you have to fix it. Now, once it seizes up, it's done for the day, and you can't use it. So it's about 5 minutes of using that, and then you're done. So, one last thing, on all steam engines everywhere, there's the steam dome, which has the safeties, and then there's the sand dome. And for the sand dome, there's lines that will go down the side of the boiler, and there'll be pipes just by the drivers, and it will shoot sand right in front of the driver so you can get traction on wet rails or steep grades or whatever you're doing that needs traction. And engines in this scale, a lot of them don't have it. This one doesn't have it, and 713 doesn't have it either. But a couple engines in our gauge do. One last thing I'd like to show you before we end this video is the blowdown valve, which is right here above the whistle, and that allows water to come out of the boiler. So at the end of the day, when I'm all done, I simply open a valve in here, and then all the water in the boiler, all the water and steam comes rushing out, and we're all done. And then there's also one on this side. And for those of you that don't know, in a diesel there's the reverser, forward, neutral, reverse. In a steam engine there's a Johnson bar, and you can set it to which kind of hard to explain for me. In a steam engine in the morning, first time out, you'll set the Johnson bar all the way forward, about 100% for the Johnson bar. As you're going and you're picking up speed, you start doing what's called hooking up, where you start pulling back on the Johnson bar just a little bit. That'll save steam, and once they start hooking up the engine, you will not hear chuffing or chugging or anything from the engine. There will be no smoke, no steam. It'll just be one big quiet machine. And that's how the Johnson bar works. Of course, there's reverse for it too, and then of course neutral. That's basically how a steam engine works. Thank you for joining me.
This is Kevin Hollahan here at the Trade Winds and Atlantic Railroad. At the public, well, not public. Well, it's our public run, but it's our fun run. All right, BBT 609.